Today we're talking about 1971 film The Andromeda Strain. It was directed by Robert Wise. He did The Haunting, which I talked about a bit ago, but I mean, classics that everybody knows, such as Sound of Music, West Side Story, Star Trek, the motion picture, which I have not seen. One of my favorite sci-fi movies, actually, The Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951. I think it holds up very, very well. And it's like one of the early ones that I think actually is just like super solid. That and Metropolis. And then, Andromeda Strain, which we're talking about. The setup, I honestly don't know too much about that, but 49, whew, it's a while ago. And then Body Snatcher, The Body Snatcher, which I've heard of before. Curse of the Cat People, Odds Against Tomorrow, Sand Pebbles, Somebody Up There Likes Me. I mean, he just has quite an extensive filmography. He was a legend, died in 2005. And I mean, I think this top six is like pretty legendary, actually. And honestly, out of all of them, I think Andromeda Strain, that or Day the Earth Stood Still are my favorite. Like, I mean, I'm a big sci-fi guy, and I guess these are the ones that he went very hard sci-fi on. And I thought this one was fantastic. So a bit of background is it was based on a novel. I believe it was 1970 because the trailer said based on the best-selling novel from the year prior. So I'm assuming the year prior to 1971 is 1970, if my math holds up. Not too sure. But it was based on a book written by Michael Crichton, who we talked about last week when we were talking about Westworld, who is the original writer for such franchises such as Jurassic Park, again, The Andromeda Strain, Sphere, Congo, Westworld, and he directed Westworld as well. So he was a legend as well. Big, influential sci-fi guy back then. And I mean, that team, just like these big, influential sci-fi guys all coming together to make this. I thought it was great. But this movie, I feel like I would not recommend this movie to many people because it's so different from movies nowadays. I absolutely loved it because I really love science-y, not just science fiction, but also just very science-y movies, because this movie was like 90% just scientists in a lab being like, what does this thing do? What is this alien rock doing here? Why are people dying? And we got to figure it out. It doesn't get like too graphic in like the disease that's spreading. I mean, I guess it does a bit at the beginning when we like initially find everything out, kind of like on the poster here. They go to the town and try to figure out what's going on. You know, bit gruesome, but I feel like that's like the first maybe 30 minutes, and then the rest of it is just in their secret laboratory trying to figure everything out. And I think that's the main reason why I wouldn't really recommend it to people, because I was very drawn in, very fascinated by all the sciencey stuff, which they kind of blended fiction and nonfiction very, very well. Because I'm sure a lot of the sciencey stuff was like, made up a bit. But Michael Crichton, the writer, who is also, he has a doctorate, I believe. And so, he kind of knows what he's talking about. I believe he was like, he was studying or something, and then he wrote this book. And I mean, he clearly knows what he's talking about. And I mean, to the layman, which I may be, you never know, very convincing and just very, thorough. The way that it was visually shown and the way they talked about everything made a lot of sense. The way they're talking about like the different elements that they're, it just felt like all of the sciencey stuff made sense and what they're doing, and you could still kind of understand where they're coming from, talking about like growth in different, different, what's the word I'm looking for, elements, and how it affects different creatures. I mean, we had the animal tests, which were actually controversial, I'm assuming at this time, because I read a bit of background. So there is animal testing in this movie. That's not really a spoiler, but they have scenes where they're testing this Andromeda Strain virus on these animals. And I mean, they used real animals, and like, at first I was like, they probably killed these animals for this. Like, they were like suffocating, and it seemed like they were dying. But apparently what they did is they had them in these boxes, and then they're pumping a bunch of CO2 in there. And then they had like, doctors around, and then right when the cut ended, they, resuscitated them and made sure they were fine. But I mean, if that would not be a practice that happens today, I believe it was signed off by some like animal group or something. That's what I just heard from a quick bit of research on that subject, but that would definitely not fly today. But I mean, goddamn, it looked pretty spectacular the way they did it. Again, going back to what I was saying about not recommending it to people, I think that's, again, a lot of people would be bored for this. It is, how long is it? It is 131 minutes. So, over 2 hours. A lot of it is just people talking, them doing a lot of like research. And it felt like it really didn't follow the traditional structure of a movie where you have all this tension, all these breakthroughs, but a lot of the middle part is just like engaging, trying to figure out what it is. I guess some of the more tense parts can come in with like the global ramifications and how they're thinking that it might connect to that, kind of like with like calls outside of the this lab that they're in to like the White House and be like, hey, so what's going on here? But man, I thought that it was just made so well. It was so engaging in my mind, just what they were saying. It was just I was hooked the whole time. And honestly, the parts that weren't in the lab were also just extremely engaging the first 30 minutes. Like them just, it's not really a spoiler, I guess, because just right in the first 30 minutes, you can kind of assume what's happening here. You know, virus breaks out. They're going to this small town, a bunch of dead bodies, and they're just roaming around trying to figure out what happened. And that initial mystery, I absolutely love that as well. But yeah, I thought overall, I thought it was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I think that technically also it looks pretty dang good for 1971. There's this thing that Robert Wise liked to do, I guess maybe the cinematographer as well, this split diopter shot, I believe it's called, where it's like you have a guy in the foreground, my hand is the guy, and a guy in the background, but they're both in focus, but you can definitely see like a clear line right in the middle where they kind of like split the focus. It's like very, very obvious, and they do it for quite a few scenes. I kind of liked it. It did look a little ratty, and I feel like because how perfect people are trying to make images nowadays, it wouldn't fly. But I thought it was pretty charming. I kind of dug it. They also did these things where it's like they cut off the frame of like, they had this full frame, and they cut it to make it just like a rectangle of where the person is. And then they put another square here and another square here of like maybe something that they're looking at, like different shots completely, kind of like did a split screen kind of thing. They were trying things back in the 70s, you know. I thought it worked pretty well. But yeah, I think overall, again, I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. If somebody's really, really into science fiction, if somebody's really likes procedural, because I do think it is still really tense. I think I kind of relate it to the science, or like the boardroom scenes in like Shin Godzilla. I mean, I guess not everybody knows that, but like Shin Godzilla, I mean, of course, for a Godzilla movie, you have the Godzilla wrecking stuff, but Shin Godzilla focused a lot on like the boardroom and the decisions that were being made, or the decisions that were trying to be made, but there's so much different process, and just the channels, and just how that just kind of like blocks all communication, and just trying to figure out the situation in that where you're frustrated and just be like, we know what we should do, but there's so many channels, so many people with different opinions. And it kind of felt like that. But I thought it was riveting. And I think all the characters were pretty good. I'm pretty sure that they didn't want to cast any really, really big stars. They wanted everybody kind of have like that, you know, more everyman feel. From the book, they changed one of the scientists' genders to be female, like by Kate Reid. And honestly, she was one of the best characters in the entire movie. I thought she was phenomenal. She kind of plays the one that's kind of doesn't want to go initially. She's a bit snarky. But no, I think her character added more complexity where it could be just a bunch of like very straight-faced scientists. Because yes, scientists, you know, you gotta add a bit of character to them, and I think they did it like subtly enough, even though the performances were still pretty laid back. I thought the main guy was very charismatic, the leader of the whole squad. I thought he was, you know, very set on his mission and focused on what to do, and I thought all the supporting cast was also pretty great. I guess before I go into spoilers, which I won't talk too much about spoilers, because I feel like the main thing about this film is just like very procedural, but still super engaging, great story. I think that the sets were super cool. So I guess, again, not really a terribly big spoiler, but again, so they have this city, which is a real city, which apparently in 2000 had a population of like 11 people. And, you know, some film buffs go there and apparently take pictures, but, you know, pretty deserted city in the US. And so, yeah, I mean, that stuff was pretty cool, like I said at the beginning. But then the real set design stuff comes in later, where they go to the secret laboratory for, what is it, Project Wildfire is what they call it. They go to the secret base, and then, you know, they go in the closet. There's this secret button, and they're like, oh, we're going like 100 meters deep in the ground. And then they have this like holographic kind of layout thing of the entire base. And there's 5 different levels. They're all color coded. Each one is deeper than the other. And if you go to the deeper level, you have to be like that much more disinfected. You know, they have a bunch of scenes at the beginning, which honestly, I think maybe those scenes dragged on a bit too long, could have been cut down, of them just like doing these different like tests. It's like them taking their clothes off, burning their clothes. Oh, you have to take this pill. We have to like scan your whole body with this like, you know, bacteria detecting. You got to make sure you're super sterile. And this cafeteria, you're only getting like these protein bars, no chance of infection, no growth in any like live food is allowed to happen. And again, that goes along with everything being very well thought through. But I mean, like the base looks super cool, and apparently all the different levels were just the same set, just like colored very differently, which again, that was very cool. I mean, I think it looked great. And also like when they're actually doing the experiments, they had like real like things that people would have used at the time of like these robotic arms that like they don't want to be in there with the space rock virus thingy. And so they have this like this arm, this mechanical arm that they control with like this like video game kind of like thingy. And it all looked very cool, you know. It was very fun. Like they had this like super zoomy, I guess, microscope. It's just a microscope. I didn't have to add an adjective there. But they had this super cool microscope. They're zooming on the space rock and everything. Looked really cool. And they're like, you know, controlling it from behind their glass. And they're doing all the experiments on the animals. And all that stuff looked great. Oh, and also they have like this room where they're also have somebody who may be contaminated. Try not to go heavy into spoilers, but you know. And then they have these suits where it's like you kind of like you step in the suit and then you're still connected to the other room, and it's kind of like the suit is just like in front of you, and then you can like walk backwards and then you get out back into the other room. And they're like on these like strings so you can still walk around the room and everything. Thought that was super cool. Thought it was great. I think the ending was a bit lackluster, and apparently it's different from the book. So I guess I will go into spoilers here if anybody cares. But I mean, I think that watching it is more of an experience than actually knowing what happens, because I mean, it was a book first after all. But the ending in this film is like there's a bunch of clouds coming, and then the virus is mutated, which does happen to a lot of viruses, as we've seen with coronavirus and everything. But it's mutated, and that they found one of their big breakthroughs at the end was that it can only survive in certain pH levels. And it was overlooked by one of the scientists because, you know, she was just thinking she was going crazy. She was having these, like, I don't know if she had a seizure exactly in that moment. I know she did a bit later, but, like, you know, her epilepsy with, like, red blinking lights might have got to her. She, you know, she thought she might have been seeing things. And she skipped over this one pH, or this one experiment that might have helped them out earlier. But then we find out, yes, certain pH levels, it can only survive in certain very narrow pH levels. And so the clouds are going to take a bunch of the virus, and then it's going to rain in the ocean, and the ocean has a certain amount of whatever's, and it'll pretty much make it ineffective anymore, and they'll be good. And they're like, oh, so nature kind of just saves the day. I love low-key science fiction where it's like, it's not about the effects, it's more about the idea and how like people, it would impact humanity, and kind of like that thought experiment that kind of sci-fi started from. I loved it. I was enthralled thoroughly. Thought it was great. Would highly recommend it.